Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it is time in the updates 1.97 devblog cycle to have a look at our first helicopter devblog of the update, and it is represented by the Kamov Ka-29. This is a Soviet attack helicopter of the rank 6 variety, and I just found it really hilarious that the tagline for this vehicle is the Nimble Fatboy. I think it's just a wonderful little tagline, which is kind of hilarious, you know, kind of showing that it is a little bit of a chunky monkey, but at the same time it's able to maneuver itself into and out of situations. The Ka-29 itself is an assault transport variant of the Soviet Ka-27, which in itself is an anti-submarine warfare helicopter, which was developed in the mid-70s by, of course, the Kamov Design Bureau. And in update 1.97, the Ka-29 will give a different way of playing the Soviet helicopters, just because it's a unique design with some interesting unique properties. A lot of people will look at it and think it's not as strong as some of the current helicopters, so, you know, why bother with it and stuff like that. But, you know, there's always other reasons to play helicopters instead of just which one is the out-and-out best one. Hopefully, as we get more helicopters into the game, there's a little bit more to distinguish them between each other, and therefore we'll get them, you know, pushed out in BRs, so certain helicopters can have more of a limelight. The history behind this vehicle is pretty simple. The Ka-29 started its development process in 1973 after the engineers at the Kamov Design Bureau decided to create an attack version of the already successful Ka-27. The machine was to be designated the Ka-252TB. That was eventually changed to the Ka-29, and the whole idea of it was that it was supposed to support amphibious naval operations by providing fire support to those advancing troops. So after all the developmental work was done, the Ka-29 was ready for testing and conducted its first flight in July of 1976, and the testing was successfully completed by 1979, so a 3-year turnaround for the machine, and it entered mass production in 1984. So overall, from maiden flight to production, we're talking about 8 years. And shortly after the Ka-29 entered service, and the Soviet Navy entered service in 1985 for them, and it served on board the newly commissioned Ivan Rogov class of landing ships, which is a wonderful name. The production of it lasted until 1988, so for 4 years, and they built around 60 of this variant of the helicopter, and the helicopter also saw combat in Chechnya in the early 2000s, and some actually served in the police special operations branches, which is kind of interesting. Maybe there's an opportunity for a camouflage there. And the Ka-29, of course, is still in service with the Russian and foreign navies, more than 3 decades after its initial production initial production and introduction, there we go, into the service. So it's one of those planes, it's one of those helicopters, I should say, which has been around for a long time, but it still seems that it finds its place in service. There are many helicopters that we have in the game which are still used today, and it's nice to see another one being added, showing how, you know, helicopters are very much a modern phenomenon, and also, even if, you know, they are in service today, there is a lot of them which are just completely different from each other. If you compare this to the Mi-28 or something similar, such as the Mi-35M for the Soviets, of course, the general ideas behind them are completely different, which is why it is so interesting to see them both be in the game, and not really competing against each other, but with each other in such fundamentally interesting ways. So the Ka-29, being a new rank 6 Soviet helicopter, it's going to come to the tree. So this isn't another premium helicopter, this is just a standard tech tree vehicle, at least from what the article says, and what you'll find with it at rank 6 is that it will be a little bit smaller than its competition, a little bit more agile, and a little bit more nimble, so it should be able to move around the place. I don't know how much that is going to help you because of the fact of how helicopter gameplay works right now. Maybe you'll be able to dodge a little bit more of the incoming ATGMs and air-to-air missiles, but we'll have to see. It is powered by two Kamov TV3 117V turboshaft engines. They give this thing around 4,380 horsepower, so a lot of oomph from those engines, and of course they power a setup which is very similar to other machines we have in games such as the Ka-50 with its two three-bladed coaxial rotors, which I think is a really interesting idea. It seems like the Soviets invested a lot of time and effort into them, and I'm hoping to see more and more of these designs as we go, through the development of helicopters from a War Thunder point of view. So as more get added, it will be nice to see more of these. The top speed at low altitude, because of the engines and also the general design, is around 280 kilometers an hour. So nothing to really write home about, but at least it's something which should be a little bit better than others. But the main thing that is emphasized here is its maneuverability of moving around the place. So the other thing as well is if we have a look at its general armaments, as I said before, I'm really happy that when it comes to these devblogs, what Gadget are doing is they're actually talking about modifications of the vehicles. They're not just talking about the ideas that we see from them. They're not just talking about the best loadouts. Instead, they're actually breaking it down into little sections like, okay, so this is what you're going to get stock, this is what you're going to get with modifications, and I think this is a much better way of doing it. So from a stock point of view, the Ka-29 will come with 80 unguided rockets. This will be split between 4 external rocket pods, so I'm guessing 20 per pod. And when it comes to modifications or researchable upgrades, you'll be able to research additional 23mm gun pods, which is kind of nice. I don't know what scenario you'd use them, but it is nice to see them. Then you can also get modifications, the 9M114 Sturm ATGMs, so similar to the ones that we already have in game, if not exactly the same. If you have any experience with the Sturms, and also an additional fixed 30mm cannon, or a combination of these weapon systems. So, just like a lot of other, machines that we see. So there are the Sturms, and then you can see the 30mm here alongside some of the rockets. So it's one of those machines which starts off with just rockets, but as it builds up modification-wise, then obviously it gets access to a lot more toys. This means that it's going to be incredibly important how much or the research is for these toys, so therefore we can have a situation where the vehicle's a little bit more useful than it is in its stock state. We see this in a few other vehicles, in the mid-tiers of the helicopter branches, where their stock loadout is completely different to their fully modified loadout, and changes your playstyle completely, depending on what you're able to bring, and hopefully that at some point will be reflected in the game. There is also a single 7.62mm rotary machine gun. This is located in the helicopter's nose and operated manually by a crew member from the cockpit. So it's obviously got a limited firing arc, but at the same time, it is able to hit people. So that is nice to see, just as a little bit of an onboard addition to it. And from there, that is pretty much all of its weaponry. The fact that it has access to ATGMs is nice. The fact that it has access to, a whole bunch of rockets, a whole bunch of guns is nice, but there obviously is stuff mentioned there which we have in game. There is stuff which isn't mentioned there which we have in game, which the Ka-29 is not going to have access to, and that is kind of its limiting factor. So the limiting factor is the fact that it doesn't have access to stuff like air-to-air missiles. It doesn't have access to any of the higher tier stuff such as the tandem warhead ATGMs, or anything with the crazy ranges that we see from some of its compatriots, e.g. the Ka-50. Instead, it is a very middling aircraft when it comes to its general secondary armament loadouts, and I would say it is going to be useful because of the fact that it has access to those Sturms when it comes to ground forces, and when it comes to the air forces battles with the guns is kind of nice, but once again I think you're going to be limited because of the fact that there is no air-to-air missiles or no warhead ATGMs. We have a bit of an issue right now in helicopters where the top tier helicopters rule the roost, and they rule it quite extensively, whether it be the K-50, the Eurocopter Tigers, whether it be sort of like the AH-1G or AH-1Z. All of these machines are incredibly potent in helicopter battles and also in ground forces realistic. So it ends up machines like this, the Ka-29, which are middling in the tech trees, are generally not seen as ones to be worth it, because you go up against those higher tier stuff and just get mauled. So for me, the only way to be able to, make this thing more, to make this thing viable compared to those machines is to make it so the BR difference between them is enough so they don't see each other. So this Ka-29 is allowed to actually, live and actually allowed to have a bit of fun. The Ka-29 doesn't have access to thermal vision, unfortunately, and it has only basic IR image intensifiers, so that's a bit of an issue, but there are it actually matters, I suppose, what its targeting system looks like. If it's similar to what we see in game when it comes to the helicopters with the little red box and being able to target, whatever you look at, even at night, I don't think it would be too much of an issue for this machine. It's just one of those things that it makes it slightly easier when it comes to if it had thermals, but unfortunately it doesn't. So that's pretty much the Ka-29. I think the last point I want to make for this thing is I really think this is another example in game of how a stock version of a vehicle is different enough from a spaded version of the same vehicle that there should be some sort of system in game which would alter the BR of a vehicle depending on how many modifications they have. This, when it is released and when it is in its stock configuration, has access to only 80 unguided rockets. That's it. That's not a lot, right? That really isn't a ton. It isn't something that you're going to write home about, especially since this thing is not going to have the same BR as the H1G, which has access to that loadout. It's going to be much higher because of the possibility of its later modifications. So it's going to have to get battered over and over and over again until you get those later tier modifications for its secondary armaments, and then you start maybe becoming competitive. I think there is a much better system that we could create where the idea of if you don't have specific modules or you are in a stock configuration that your BR would be lower than if you have a fully spaded vehicle should be explored, and vehicles like this would only benefit from that idea. Otherwise, I am worried about this machine not finding a place in the game because it will just become fodder for the vehicles which are higher than it and have access to all of those systems, which unfortunately it doesn't. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I just want to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Martinez, Super Cacti, Trigger Hippie, Eugene's Terry, and also Elove Goat and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.